The final chapter on JFK, Chapter 20, Segment 8, Finito.
Welcome back. This is the final segment, Finito, Finito. This will be our last time together. And if you have been following this series from the beginning, you may recall in the first segment, I told you that if you watched the entire series, you would know more than all of the Warren Commission members combined. I think you've learned that here. What I want to impart upon you, and what I think is important, is that we have laid out a stream of facts from beginning to end showing Lyndon Johnson's involvement in Kennedy's killing. And I have been saying this all the way back to 1991, where I was blacklisted and blackballed, not allowed on television, had to resort to doing talk radio because all of the major media outlets didn't want to hear what I was saying. This is our opportunity to summarize things for you, kind of refresh your memory as to everything that's occurred in this series. If you recall, Ryan Schmidt, the head of Solheim Media in the first chapter, told you that this was going to be the most extensive video series ever, and I think we've done that. 20 chapters, around 100 segments, 13 hours or so of content. And you should know that if I missed something, we left about 35 to 40 hours of my talk and exhibits on the editing room floor. Too much. To end this series, the question is, where should we start? Well, let's start at the beginning. The series title card. Warren Commission Exhibit 889, The Trees. No one would ever attempt to assassinate President John F. Kennedy in a Dallas motorcade as the limousine was traveling away from the Texas School Book Depository, down and away, when trees blocked the view and when a clear target was available coming down Houston Street, turning right in front of the Texas School Book Depository. All clear and unobstructed shots. And worse yet, the false photographs of the assassination lair showing 2 boxes of books stacked up with a third tumbled off the front. All of those were false. The alleged assassination lair had 4 book boxes stacked up to a height over the top of the open window. Was Lee Harvey Oswald involved in a conspiracy? Probably. And in fact, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover reported that in writing right after Lee Harvey Oswald was murdered. He stated, quote, "Since we now think it involves the criminal code on a conspiracy charge under Section 241, we want them to shut up." And he was referring to the Dallas Police Department. A conspiracy does not involve one person. What really happened in this case is that after John F. Kennedy was shot and killed, all efforts were made to convince America that Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole killer. And in fact, J. Edgar Hoover, in a separate memo, stated that his concern was that they wanted to convince the public that Oswald was the real assassin. We know that right after Kennedy was killed, the CIA, Hoover, and the new president, Lyndon Johnson, were aware of the fact that there was an imposter Oswald, and yet this was covered up for more than 35 years. Was Lee Harvey Oswald a patsy like he claimed? Yes, he probably was. Going one step further, we discussed motive, opportunity, and means. In this case, Lyndon Johnson had political motives, he had economic motives, and he had personal motives, plus timing and control. The timing in this situation involved 3 scandals that were about to destroy Lyndon Johnson take him off Kennedy's ticket for 1964 and would have ruined him politically for the rest of his life. Control. Lyndon Johnson controlled the trip that Kennedy was on, controlled the crime scene that occurred, controlled the evidence after the fact, including the limousine, even his buddy's clothes, John Connolly's clothes. Johnson's aide, Cliff Carter, took those clothes and miraculously they were dry cleaned and washed, destroying all evidentiary properties for those clothes. Lyndon Johnson also took control of Kennedy's body and the autopsy. Johnson even had the control to the extent that both his aides and himself in personal phone calls demanded that Lee Harvey Oswald be charged as a sole assassin, irrespective of anything else they suspected or could prove, and thereby keeping the case out of Bobby Kennedy's hands. Johnson even had the control to create his own commission to investigate the crime. Who had the power to plan the trip? Who had the power to control the evidence? Who had the power to seize the evidence? Who had the power to create their own commission? Was it Russia? Was it Castro? Was it the CIA? No. The only person that had that power was Lyndon Baines Johnson, whose sole goal in life was to become the President of the United States. A bloody coup was carried out on November 22, 1963, when a sitting president was assassinated as the final act of a conspiracy. The seeds of the conspiracy was planted in a Los Angeles hotel room over the weekend of July 10, 1960. It was there that representatives of organized crime met to agree on whom to support for the Democratic Party presidential nomination. And when they finally agreed to support Jack Kennedy with the voting delegates they controlled at the convention, these men extracted a promise from Joseph Kennedy, the patriarch of the Kennedy family, that if Jack was elected president, his sons, Jack and Robert, would not actively prosecute organized crime families during their administration. This is how Lyndon Johnson got on the ticket. A deal was made with the devil, and Johnson was the backup man. Johnson and his former campaign manager, John Connally, planned Kennedy's Texas trip. John F. Kennedy was actually urged not to make that trip by his aides, and John Connally flew up and convinced Kennedy to make that trip, which is exactly what Brutus did with Julius Caesar over 1,000 years ago. Lyndon Johnson's gamble paid off. His shrewd management of the Kennedy trip and the Kennedy assassination evidence after the fact, and his skillful blockade of all impartial investigations into Kennedy's murder, thereby preventing any possible discovery of a conspiracy, were the acts of a calculating gambler and a cunning politician, not the acts of an innocent man. At the end of the day, you as the viewer either believe or refuse to believe the conspiracy theory that's been presented in this series. The non-believers would complain that much of the information presented here is merely circumstantial, and that's certainly true. Bear in mind, however, that juries convict accused criminals all the time based upon circumstantial evidence. And bear in mind that most of the evidence missing was the result of one of the criminal suspects, Lyndon Baines Johnson. On the other hand, those of you who have seen this series and believe that President Kennedy's murder was a result of a conspiracy and that Lyndon Johnson was deeply involved, and accept the fact that there is sufficient circumstantial evidence to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, you viewers see this murder as a high-risk, high-reward gamble by a self-professed Texas gambling man, which paid off handsomely as a result of the most significant criminal cover-up and political whitewash in United States history, all performed by the prime suspect. In this regard, all one has to do is to accept the statements of murdered Jack Ruby, who not only accused Lyndon Johnson of direct involvement, but proclaimed that the assassination was, quote, a complete conspiracy. If you knew the truth, you would be amazed. And from that statement, let one's mind wander. The reality is that the final chapter on JFK begins and ends with Lyndon Baines Johnson. Those of you who cannot accept Lyndon Johnson's involvement in the assassination, no matter how much the evidence points to it, might ask, what would motivate a successful, powerful man like Johnson to ever become involved in a murder plot? The prospect of a vice president of the United States conspiring to murder the president boggles the mind of normal, law-abiding citizens, and rightly so. Most of us will never experience the hunger for power that LBJ had always expressed, nor will we ever experience the type of power that Lyndon Johnson had known most of his adult life. U.S. Representative, U.S. Senator, Senate Majority Leader, and Vice President. One is reminded of the old maxim, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. For some people, they will do anything for that type of power, and they would even kill for it. Thanks for watching. I would like to thank Ryan Schmidt and his team at Solheim Media for putting this entire project together. And I would like to specifically thank his wife, Melanie, who in the midst of labor and delivery was still doing our voiceovers for all of our chapter headings and our segment headings. I would like to tell you, see you soon, but since this is our last segment, I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. Maybe I will see you soon because I think we have something new coming up on the horizon in a couple of months. Stay tuned.